Question.
So I have a clarification.
Clarifications.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a clarification for the Minister for Finance. I would like to know how long does the government expect the increase in structural expenditure in healthcare to last, and at what speed it will increase? I understand that the increase is largely because of due to aging population. And the biggest aging generation is my generation, the medical generation. And I would expect that we will diminish in number over time. So how much is exactly the projection and expenditure?
Well, Mr. Speaker, sir, I thank Mr. Lau for your question. And I'm glad that you are in the medical generation. And as I said in my speech, I hope that our medical generation will redefine aging and that youth continue to stay healthy, stay active, and stay connected, and live longer. So, as to your question, how long will this structural increase in our healthcare expenditure last? Well, in my speech, I mentioned what we have been doing. For instance, studying what the OECD's experienced. I mentioned about the experience of a number of countries. Last year, I was in Japan to look at what they were doing to deal with the problems of an aging population. And I must say that there are many variables that go into the long-term care costs and the long-term support that is needed. In fact, the one minister that I spent a lot of time with is Minister Gan Kim Yong, because each time I see him, he comes up with a higher set of figures. So if you ask me how long will this last, I would not want to mislead this House that we are continuing to study this very carefully. All I can say it is going to last for quite a number of years. And as I said, there are many variables which are not certain. Because, for instance, how will our lifespan change? And what is the extent to which our seniors will continue to be healthy? How will medical advances change? Right? And how would new drugs, new treatment methods change the cost structure and change the life expectancy? There are many doctors in this House, and I think even if you ask all our doctors here, they will not be able to give you a definitive answer because there is a wide range of uncertainty. So we must plan on a long-term basis. And we're not just having an aging population, we're also having aging infrastructure, as Ms. Ting Pei Ling reminded us. And as I said in my budget speech, we're also looking at all these long-term needs very carefully, and we'll share this when ready.
Mr. Pritam Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to thank the Finance Minister for his roundup speech and addressing some of the issues that were raised in my speech. I want to revisit this idea of not a cohort-based universal health benefit scheme for our seniors, but something more permanent. And my point really comes back to some of the other issues that were raised by SMSG Hong Tat and some of the other members. And the argument really is the government will not know how much its surplus would be through the course of the term before it decides, how much it can give out for these packages. So you have to earn your keep before spending, so to speak. But if we look at the annex, one of the budget annexes on the analysis of revenue and expenditure, based on the NIRC component, which includes both NII and NIR, one can estimate for the last 4 years it's up to 62 billion, and based on the trending it would probably appear to be about 80 billion over the course of one government's term, provided it runs for its full 5 years. Be that as it may, I'd like to make a quick reference to Singapore Perspectives background paper, which was released in 2018. This was an IPS survey that was carried out. I have an extra copy, if Mr. Speaker, can I just pass it to the Finance Minister?
Yes, please.
So on page 14 of the paper, which is a Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy paper, there are two questions that are asked. First question is, would you be comfortable paying for higher social spending on the elderly through higher taxation instead of tapping on the national reserves? Second question is, should net investment returns used to fund social expenditure for the current generation be increased and the amount reserved for future generations likewise decreased? Now, there is a response on page 13, and the response is slightly more respondents, 40%, disagree to paying higher taxes to fund increased social spending on the elderly. And the survey notes that while there were more neutral responses to the question on using a larger share of the returns from investing national reserves to finance higher social spending, more respondents agreed to the statements than disagreed with it. I mean, to a large extent, not surprising. I mean, people would react emotionally to issues of taxation, how it's funded, and so forth. But I think what was interesting was the final analysis from the IPS researchers, which was, for both questions, respondents aged 45 to 64 years, and I'm assuming Ah Seng and Ah Kong are part of these respondents, respondents aged 45 to 64 years were more likely to disagree to pay higher taxes rather than tapping on national reserves, and to agree to using a larger share of the net investment returns to finance current social spending for the elderly. And this is the interesting part. This age group experiences the highest tax burden and may be feeling the greatest uncertainty about financing their own post-retirement living expenses. So with that as a gauge, I mean, I have to put the issue again about NIRC, for which NII is a component. If you look at the Merdeka package, about 6.1 billion, 8 billion with interest and other components coming in, it's still a small percentage of the overall NIRC revenue that the government is constitutionally given. And in that context, is it possible to still consider moving away from cohort-based packages to something more permanent and universal, but with of course, the additional Medisave top-ups and other issues which I raised in my speech as optional items, so to speak. That's my first clarification, and I apologize if I went too long. My next one is much shorter. So at the last budget debate, the Workers' Party made a point that we support the budget, but because of the announcement on the GST, we voted against the budget. Similarly, for this year, we support the budget, but our position on the GST has not changed, and I just want to put that down for the record. Thank you.
Well, Mr. Speaker, so Mr. Pritam Singh asked about whether we should have a more permanent scheme. But if you have heard me carefully during the roundups, the MOH already have many permanent schemes, many permanent subsidies, and the 6.1 billion that it is spending on this alone will give you an idea of that. And as I said earlier, we already have many structural subsidies which are already built into our healthcare system. So the Merdeka generation and the Pioneer generation package builds on top of what we already have. And this is a subsidy on a subsidized rate. So I think it's important for us to appreciate the complexity that went into, the care rather, that went into designing this very complex system. We spent a lot of time thinking about how best we can do this in a sustainable way. Now, second, on your point about, well, can we not, you're citing the IPS survey and so on. And as you can see, in the IPS survey, respondents vary in their comments, whether they should be funding current, they should be funding future, and so on. Now, the Merdeka generation, we must not confuse the Merdeka generation package and the Pioneer generation package that have been set aside to fund this long-term care with the use of the NIRC. The NIRC comes into as a big pot, and that helps us to fund a number of other things. The Merdeka, those packages that we have specifically target that group, and it comes from what we have today in current reserves. We have not touched the past reserves. And as I said earlier, the reserves are a strategic asset for Singapore. You don't know how the global situation would develop, and it is important for us to have that strategic asset for the long term. And that's why my whole budget roundup speech is about planning for the long term while you address and adapt for changes for short-term development.
Any other further clarifications?
Question is that Parliament approves the financial policy of the government for the financial year 1st April 2019 to 31st March 2020. As many as are of the opinion say aye. To the contrary say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.